Hey guys, welcome to this week's pre-lab video. I'm going to be demonstrating the preparation of pie pastry so that we can observe in lab the differences between variations in fat when making pie pastries. It's a pretty simple recipe. The things you'll need are all-purpose flour. You'll need 1/2 cup of that, so you'll need a 1/2 cup dry measure. We're going to be using salt, just a little bit of that. You'll need a 1/4 teaspoon dry measure for that. And then one of 3 different fat variations. You'll need 2 tablespoons, so have your 1 tablespoon measure. Use 2 of those. For the oil, that'll be easy. You can just pour out 2 tablespoons of that. The shortening will be your second fat variation, and that actually has measurements on the side, so you can just cut off the amount that you need. And then the third variation that each group will be making is with your favorite, the lard. And again, for that, you can just use your tablespoon measure to scoop that out, but you'll need to pack it down a little bit since it's solid, and we're not just going to be cutting it off like with the shortening. So also have a knife ready so that you can kind of knife some out and press it down into there to get your appropriate measure. I'll be demonstrating with the use of lard for this particular one, but remember, each group is going to be making all 3 variations. It doesn't take very long to cook, so you'll have plenty of time. So the first thing you'll need, and for this you'll also need the straight edge of your plastic knife, is a 1/2 cup of flour. So we'll just pull that out, scrape off the top, and you can kind of sift that into your bowl. We won't be using the sifter, we'll just be pouring that in. 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Sprinkle that in, and then use your knife to kind of sift those together. And then you need your fat. I'll be using the lard for this, so I'm going to scoop out as much as I can. Use one of my knives to kind of press it down. Scrape off the excess. There's 1 tablespoon. And scoop it out as best I can. Mash it down with my knife. Scrape off the excess. I have a little bit of a hole there, so I'm going to scrape some more into there. And into my bowl. Now we need to cut the fat into the flour. And so we'll be using both of our plastic knives for that, and just using a crosswise motion through the bowl here, we will cut that fat into smaller and smaller pieces as we mix it with the flour. Now regardless of what kind of fat you use, as you do this, that fat is going to mix with the flour, coat the flour, and it's going to break up into smaller and smaller little pieces. We're going for pea-sized amount here, so not big chunks of fat in there. You want to keep going and keep going until eventually you get really small little pea-sized chunks that are coated with the flour mixed in with that. So I've already done one with the oil, and even with the oil, you'll see that it has broken up into little pea-sized chunks, and so this is ready to go. So the oil, even though it's liquid when it goes in, it will mix and kind of clump with the flour, and you'll still get those good pea-sized clumps. Now the next thing we need is a 1.5 tablespoons of water. So we've got some drinking water here. We'll use our tablespoon, and we're just going to kind of eyeball it. So we'll do the first tablespoon. You don't just want to pour it in there, you kind of want to sprinkle it in there. The goal here is to not get any really wet parts of the dough. We just want to pour in enough to get a little bit wet. So as you're kind of stirring with your knife, you'll just sprinkle it around and then mix it some. And sprinkle a little bit more in here and mix it around. Sprinkle a little bit more and just continue mixing it around. We want to evenly distribute the water through the dough without excessively wetting any part of the dough, because those gluten and those gliadin proteins, as soon as they get into water, will have the opportunity to start interacting with each other and forming gluten. We don't want gluten because we don't want a tough pie crust. So it's really important not to just pour it in there, or else you'll get a big spot of really, really wet dough, but just sprinkle it in and mix it around a little bit at a time. So there's my first tablespoon. I'm just going to kind of mix that around a little bit. Eyeball another 1/2 tablespoon of water. That's about 1/2. Again, you don't want to overdo it, so I'm just going to pour a little bit in there. I'm not actually going to use all of that because my dough is looking nice and wet here. It's cleaning away from the sides of the bowl nicely, so I think it's plenty wet. we are ready to gather our dough up into a ball. So again, that's nice. It's not sticking to the sides of the pan too much. I'm just going to press it into a ball. All those little pieces that try to get away, I'm going to gather them up into my ball. There we go. And here I have a nice little dough ball. Got a few escapees here in the bowl here. I'll scrape them out. Press them nicely into my ball here. Again, we don't want to over manipulate this because, again, the wetter this gets and the more we manipulate those gluten and proteins together, right, the more we'll get gluten formation. So we just want to kind of gather this up into a nice ball, right, something that we can roll out nicely, but not manipulating any more than that. At this point, you want to hand your dough ball off to the person who has 2 sheets of wax paper. So somebody should have 2 sheets of wax paper. Right, we'll put that dough ball on there. They're also going to have a rolling pin. And then to make sure that we get an even thickness for our rolled out dough, we're actually going to use a couple of pieces of pencils, a couple of pencils as guides on either side of that so that we can roll it out to an even thickness. So while that person is working on rolling out the dough, you can take your bowl, go and wash it, and start making the second variation. So again, a ½ cup of flour, ¼ teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons of whatever your next fat variation is, because you're going to be making all 3 variations. And so you want to hand off that dough ball and let that person work with that, rolling that out while you make your next dough variation. So set that aside, bring front and center my dough ball here. I've got it sitting on a piece of wax paper. I'm going to press that out just a little bit. And if the edges break a little bit, I'll just go ahead and kind of reform that into a little patty there. And then set my second sheet of wax paper over the top of that. And then the 2 pencils will just set underneath on either side of our dough ball. And that'll tell us how much to roll it out. That's going to be about 1/8 of an inch, which is a good thickness for making something like a pie pastry. So now I have my rolling pin, and I'm just going to roll it over the top of this dough. Flattening that out until I get down to the thickness of the pencils. We can set that aside and pull off our top piece. Now I have a piece of pie pastry rolled out that's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Take my plastic knife and I want to cut this into rectangles of approximately 1 inch by 5 inches, so fairly small rectangles. Right, and you're going to want 5 of those in all. There's 2. 3. 4, that one broke apart a little bit. So if you need to, you might need to take your scraps and re-roll them to get that 5th strip. I have 4 nice strips here. So here's one of my strips of about 1 by 5 inches. I'm going to take one of the pans that are out of the oven, put a piece of foil on that, just spray it lightly with some vegetable oil cooking spray here. And then gently, without stretching or breaking your dough pieces, you just want to set those on the pan. Go. And I have a few remnants here, so I would just roll these remnants out again the same way as I did before, so I could get my 5th square. And now I have my pie pastry pieces ready to go. These will go into the oven at 425 degrees for 10 minutes, and then we will take those out and we will make our evaluation of them.
So to recap, for the pastry dough recipe, you'll need a ½ cup of flour and a ¼ teaspoon of salt. Those you'll sift together just using your plastic knife until the salt and the flour seem well mixed in together. Then you'll add 2 tablespoons of whatever your fat source is. You can do shortening, then you'll do lard, then you'll do oil. And again, each group is going to do all 3 variations. Add your 2 tablespoons of fat, and then cut it into the flour using the technique that I showed you with 2 knives crossing them back and forth across each other. You want to cut the fat into the flour until it clumps up into little pea-sized balls. So if you have large pieces of shortening or lard, or the oil is not yet coalesced into little balls, then keep going until you have tiny little balls and it kind of looks like the consistency of cornstarch or something like that. Okay. When you're done with that, add a tablespoon and a half of water, and this you want to sprinkle in just a little bit at a time while you're stirring. The idea is to not get any part of the dough too saturated with water, right? You just want to sprinkle in enough water to saturate all of that flour. So continuously stir with a fork while you sprinkle in the water a little bit at a time until the dough is wet enough to clean off the sides of the bowl without sticking to it. At this point, you are ready to gather your dough into a ball and press it gently together, but that's all you want to do. You're not kneading this dough, you're just gathering it into a ball, pressing it into a nice round ball. After that, you're going to roll it out on wax paper to a thickness of about 1/8 of an inch, and you can use a couple of pencils on either side of the wax paper to use as your measurement for 1/8 of an inch. Roll that out, and then cut your dough into 5 approximately 1 by 5 inch rectangles. If you need to gather your kind of scraps to get your 5th rectangle, that's okay. You can just gather that back up, press it into a ball, roll it out again, and get that 5th rectangle. Then you will bake them in the oven at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. You can go a little bit longer if you need to. 10 minutes should be about right. But if your pastry dough doesn't look quite cooked, you don't see any browning yet on the dough, then maybe give it up to another 5 minutes until it's ready. And that is how you make the pastry dough.
And we're back. Once you have cooked your pie pastry crusts, it's time to do an evaluation of them. So the first thing you're going to do is get an objective evaluation of flakiness. So by stacking them each on top of each other, all 5 of your pieces, and measuring the height, we can get an objective measurement, right, for just how flaky or how many layers that pie pastry has split into as it's risen by steam leavening in the oven. Right? So take each of your 3 different variations, stack them up, and get a measure of that. Then after that, right, take 2 of your crusts and just break the stack in half. Right? That'll give you a measurement of the break strength of that pastry. And I want you to put each of the 3 variations in order from 1 to 3, from the one with the least break strength to 3, the one with the greatest break strength. After that, you're ready for your sampling of these pie pastry crusts so that you can get an evaluation. You can make your subjective measurements of flavor, tenderness, and then another, this time, subjective measurement of the flakiness as opposed to our objective one where we measured it before. Right? So put it in your mouth, right? Chew it and see how flaky it seems to you, and record all that data in your data sheet. And you're done. Thanks, guys.